Hello, friends. Welcome back to another King's Table video. I wanted to just start off by saying that I hoped you had a Merry Christmas with family or friends or loved ones, and that you use it as a time to focus on the good things that God has given you in your life, in the present, also the past, through the birth of His Son, and why we believe what we believe. So I hope that your holidays were good. I'm excited to be back recording videos for y'all. Took a couple of days off, obviously, hanging out with my family. But as I've been telling y'all, I've been in the book of Exodus, and it's been super cool to see the things that the Lord has been revealing to me. So, in the book of Exodus, chapter 16, we find ourselves at the end of the chapter, and this is when the Lord provided manna or bread for the Israelites to go out and daily gather. He put a lot of rules on it so that they would recognize their need for Him. Because a lot of time, this is a little realization that I had the other day that I actually wasn't going to talk about. I just got reminded of it. In Exodus, it talks about how they're supposed to gather it for 6 days, and then on the sixth day, they gather enough for the day of rest, so that they aren't going out and gathering. But every other day, they go out on Monday. They go out, they get what they need, and they trust the Lord's provision in that day, and they don't store up stuff for the next day. They trust on Tuesday, God will provide. On Wednesday, God will provide. On Thursday, God will provide. And it was a huge realization for me when it comes to my relationship with work, where a lot of times I try and work ahead, and a lot of times I just end up getting frustrated and annoyed, and it ends up being worse than it was if I hadn't worked ahead. And I just feel like the Lord being like, Michael, trust that I will provide for you today, and trust that I will provide for you tomorrow, and trust that I'll provide for you the next day. Um, and then also trust that, like, on Saturday or Friday, that I can work ahead so that I don't have to on Saturday and Sunday, just like He promises, and like go into that prayerfully. So if you're somebody like me who struggles with working ahead or trying to get a lot done or whatever it may be, like, trust in the Lord's provision. Trust that He will provide for you today. Trust that He will provide for you tomorrow. It was really, really just like kind of eye opening to me as I recognized that. But that wasn't what this was about. But I hope that was encouraging. So in Exodus chapter 16, at the end, verse 31, it says, "Now the house of Israel called its name manna." So that's the bread that came down from heaven. "It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, 'This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt.' And Moses said to Aaron, 'Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations.' As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years, till they came to the habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan." Okay. So really, really cool there. And there's a lot of little details that I want to kind of pull out and talk about as well. So let's get into those. So the first thing that I took some notes on and wrote down here was that we still have to work to gather God's provision. So they had to go out each day and collect the manna. And it was probably pretty tedious because it said it was the size of a coriander seed. And you would need a lot of it in order to make what they needed. So there was a constant, focused, detail driven pursuit of God's provision in that moment. So it wasn't just like loaves of bread fell down from heaven, already made, already good to go, etc., to where they would just walk out, grab a loaf, and start eating it. There was a process of receiving the Lord's provision. It still requires an action on our part to receive. Now, are there times where the Lord can provide in that fullest sense where it takes absolutely no effort on our part? Yes. But I think that it's really cool to see in this situation that He still made them work to receive their provision. Just like He says, for us providing like our daily bread and all of this kind of stuff, there's still a process that goes into it. And his provision still requires an action on our part. And I think that's important to note, that there isn't a laziness or kind of sitting down where a lot of people will be like, oh, I don't need to go do this because the Lord will provide. And it's like, well, I mean, that doesn't mean you just need to stay at home and do nothing and just expect to get everything that you need. Like, that's irresponsible. There is still, like, God designed us to work. We see that with Adam in the garden. And so there's still that, like, the provision is there, but we have to go and collect it. We have to be a part of that. And honestly, that's just cool that the Lord allows us to be a part of his provision in that way, you know. Next, I love this whole idea of storing it in a jar for generations to remember. So, a generation is around 20 to 30 years. It's measured different, like in different cultures, but it's basically like the lifespan of somebody to be born and then have another child. And so they wanted to store this up for generations so that people could remember God's provision. Hebrews 9, verse 4 says that it ended up being kept in the Ark of the Covenant. So this manna that was stored in a jar ended up being kept in the Ark of the Covenant. Now, if you read the previous verses in Exodus, it talks about how if the people went and collected too much for the next day, it would end up getting like moldy and stinky and get worms and all that kind of stuff. And so it was just like, provide for you today. And so I think that that's cool that it was stored in a jar, but the Lord also preserved it to where it wouldn't just disappear and get moldy or whatever would happen to manna. Like, like you think about storing that up over time, you would think that it would like deteriorate. Um, but the Lord preserved it in that jar as an example of his provision for his people. And it really challenged me to think about how we need to preserve examples of God's goodness in our life to remind us of ways that he has provided for us. And if we just leave it up to our memory deteriorates. The details fade. And it's making me think about how much I want to like journal very clear, detailed things about God's provision in my life to store up for generation to generation so that my kids can read it and their kids can read it and their kids can read it once I'm gone and in heaven, that a journal of God's goodness in the life of their father, grandfather, great grandfather could be like passed down as an example of things that God did. Um, and I just think that that would be really, really cool. And so I want to encourage you to store up examples of God's goodness in your life so that you can reflect on it when your memory and your details have faded, so that you can be remembered of God's goodness and it can encourage you, um, and for future generations that we can affect and show stories of God's goodness there. But let's see, God helped preserve it in the jar so that it wouldn't mold. I think that's so cool. And let's see, so it goes on to say that after they stored this up, they continued to eat and be provided with manna for 40 years. So the blessings were still continued on. God would continue to give them manna. But at the beginning of it, he said, store this up, write this down, store it, put it before the Lord so that people can remember and see God's goodness in our life. And he'll continue to bless and he'll continue to move in your life. But it's important to take it at first. I almost like this is not just kind of coming to me as I think about it. You know, we're supposed to tithe our first and our best. Storing up our first and our best memories of God's goodness. It's probably good. It's probably good to take our first and best memories of things that God has done in our life, write it down, store it up for generations and generations. Um, and after the 40 years, they go into the promised land, and this constant daily provision from the Lord was gone in the sense of manna. And he had to provide for them in other ways. And I think that this was done obviously because the promised land was amazing and it was filled with so much goodness. But I know me, I can become lazy, and we definitely see that with the people of Israel, to where there's laziness and dependency. And yes, we are supposed to be dependent on God for everything. But like I said earlier, there also is a responsibility for work and leaning into God's provision and cultivating it. Like we think about the parable of the talents, where a ruler gives people different sorts of talents, and they invest it, they do things with it, they work to grow what God has given them. But then the one who put it in the ground and didn't do anything with it and was lazy with it, it didn't grow. And we see that with the parable of the talents, that we need to put work in to grow what God has given us, into better and better things. All right, so John chapter 6, verse 32 through 33 here says, Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. So Jesus reflecting back to that, saying it wasn't Moses who gave you the bread, it was God. God provided it. Jesus, his Father in heaven, provided that bread. Verse 33, for the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, Sir, give us this bread always. Verse 33 again, for the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. He, like Jesus talks about being living water. But right there, he's saying that he's the bread of life. God sent his son now in the form of the bread. So just as God provided for the Israelites, then through manna, he has now sent daily bread in the form of his son, Jesus Christ, down to the world to provide that daily sustenance, y'all. And what that means for us is there's a daily recognition of our need for Christ, and we carefully gather what he has for us each and every day, and we need to rest in him on the Sabbath day. So one day a week, we need to rest in him. Comparing Jesus here to the manna that was provided by the Lord, the people of Israel daily had to recognize their need for Jesus or their need for that bread. They needed that. They needed that bread daily. We need Jesus every single day. They had to go out and meticulously collect the small details of manna and gather them up to create something good and fulfilling for them in their life. We, every day, need to lean into Jesus, meticulously collecting the little details that give us a bigger picture of who he is and how he provides for us in our daily life. And on Sundays, or on our day of rest, whatever that may be for you, because there are people who work in the church where they work on Sunday and so their Sabbath is Friday, whatever it may be. 6 days of work, 6 days, and then that seventh day of resting in the presence of Jesus and who he is. Now, that's not saying like, don't on Sundays, don't go and gather information about Jesus. Like that's exactly what Sunday is. It's is to show us our need for him again. But that comparison of him being the manna from heaven is so cool because we see all the details of what it was and how they had to collect it. And we need to do the same for our lives with Christ. We need to daily pursue him. We need to go out in the morning, collect the details, collect everything, put it all together to make something that is sustainable and good for us. The Bible can be difficult to read sometimes. It can be hard to understand it. That's why there's things like the app Enduring Word, which I look at a lot. I don't read that solely. I go there after reading the Word from God and pursuing Him in prayer. And if I have questions or want to see other people's perspectives, then I go and pursue that kind of stuff. But I just want to challenge you. I want to challenge you daily, spend time with Jesus, meticulously grab the details that he's trying to show you as he provides for you, and then write down and store up God's goodness and his provision for you in your life for generations and generations to come. Love you guys. Again, hope that you have a good holiday season, remembering the gift of Jesus for us. See you guys in the next video. Take care.